Yes, David Roberts joins me now. I've been immersed in your last, I don't know, a couple of months of work, just trying to make sure I knew what I wanted to talk with you about. And how's it going over at Volts? Because you are really doing great work from my vantage point.
It's going great. There's just a lot of stuff to cover, a lot of stuff happening out there. It's an exciting time to be covering this stuff.
You seem to care a lot, think a lot, take seriously what your readers and subscribers want to hear about. How do you decide who you're talking to and what about?
That's everybody outside. You probably get this. Everybody outside thinks the process is much more rational than it is. It's some mix of who happens to show up in my inbox, what news story I happen to see, what happens to be on my mind, who somebody knows somebody, or a lot of it is just catch as catch can. It just pops up. My inbox is inundated constantly. So I have a wide variety to pick from. So some of it is what's on my mind, and some of it is stuff that I just probably wouldn't have occurred to me if it hadn't just fallen onto my radar from outside, like the recent episode with Tombo Banda on African mini grids in Africa. Like I idly thought about that before, but I didn't really have it on my list. But then sort of she popped up and I'm like, wow, she's great. She's smart. Let's take advantage. So it's a grab bag.
I am loving all of it, and I know a lot of my listeners do as well, and consider you a really trusted source. I love also your politics. I'm glad you're still on Twitter. How's that going? Just your quick take on the status of Twitter, because I'll go right over your timeline and see everything you've said in the last couple of days or a day, and appreciate it. So I like it for that. How are you experiencing it still?
I use it the same way I always have. It's definitely degraded from where it was at its heights. There's a lot more jerks, Nazis, blue checks, idiots. Just a lot more idiocy on it, and there's a lot more spam. There's a lot more bots. I have 200,000 people on there that I spent 10 years, good Lord, 13 now years building up. And I've gone and looked at the alternatives and they don't seem all that appealing. So I'm just tweeting on all the way I have. There's an element of just shouting at the clouds about it. What else am I going to do?
They're very impactful to me. I love your Twitter account and your timeline. You've been talking obviously a lot about the politics of the country. How do you describe yourself politically? Do you ascribe to any kind of label or labels? What do you think of that at all? Are you open about your own political ideology?
I think in practical terms, I'm probably a pretty off the shelf social democrat, just your Scandinavian social democracy, pretty straightforward stuff. In the US context, that amounts to being very far left. In a European context, I think I'd be much something more closer to center left. My heart of hearts, deep in my heart of hearts, I'm just a true blue hippie peace and love guy, but you have to deal with the world as it is, and social democracy, I think, is the best thing we've found thus far for allowing the better sides of humanity to come out and doing something to suppress the worst sides.
How worried are you to see what we have left lost? Maybe starting with the news out of the trends in Europe. All of this matters to the specific work that you do covering climate and energy, and obviously decisions that countries and international organizations make together for the future of the planet. So how do you see things playing out right now in Europe and the US? Because I could hear it argued both ways about the trends.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say, the top thing I would say, and what I think every political pundit should say first for every answer is, I don't know what's going to happen. No one knows. Like there's so many powerful cross-cutting forces at work right now. Like I would believe a utopian future. I would believe a dystopian future. I would believe anything in between. Like, I really genuinely have no idea. I will say I'm extremely worried. I do see a lot of things that seem to be moving in the wrong direction. The top thing I'm worried about is basically the effects of climate change causing a lot of disasters, causing a lot of conflict, causing a lot of migration, basically just low level exacerbating all the tensions in international human society. And my fear is that the reaction to those stressors is not going to be, hey, let's hold hands and cooperate on this collective problem. I worry that the reaction is going to be putting up walls, retreating behind walls, just a lifeboat mentality, everybody for themselves. And that is what I see in the sort of far right resurgence in Europe and here, basically. Just like the more fear, the more general fear and level anxiety people feel, the more likely they are to fall for authoritarian, nationalistic politics. And that is a self-reinforcing cycle that, that like it's difficult to think of what could interrupt that cycle and send it in a different direction. There's a dread, there's a certain dread to it. But the one bit of comfort I take is just that I feel like you could plop down anywhere in human history. And if you looked around you, you would think, dang, things are falling apart, right? like things are headed to a terrible place. And yet, like somehow good things happen. Like somehow poverty declines, somehow child mortality declines, somehow civilization persists, and like somehow good things keep happening despite all the sort of terrible indicators. That's like nothing specific to point to. That's not much to hang your hat on. It's more like a kind of a religious faith
I
almost. But
appreciate
I have to believe that like good outcomes are possible.
I appreciate that, and I think I share that view pretty similarly. What about just here in the US? My main question is, are you surprised with the staying power of the disgraced former president after the insurrection, after everything, and then after obviously this recent conviction? He seems to have a strong hold on a certain support. In some ways, you could maybe argue he's gained support. I'm not sure what you think about that, but are you surprised because you're generally right about how things are gonna go?
I think the savvy pundit thing to say is, "Oh, of course, I saw this coming. I knew the like globalization back when trade wars. I saw this coming." Yeah, nobody saw this coming. Everybody was surprised. Everybody was surprised in 2016, and I think I've been like ever since 2000, late 2015. I've just been trying to beat that out of myself, like trying not to be surprised at anything
Mm.
anymore. You know what I mean? Because there's only so long you can live your life being serially shocked and outraged before you're just before you're just drained. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? That's
Yes.
how they use you up.
Yeah.
That's what they're going for, is for you to just feel drained by the whole thing. So, yeah, I am surprised, though I get it on some level. I think support for Trump is much, much less about anything in particular about Trump or any particular policy he's talking about or any policy agenda on the right. I think it's mostly just about I think the system is I'm bored and I'm angry and I'm generally discontent and things just seem bad and the system seems bad and everything seems sclerotic and nothing seems to be working and everybody seems corrupt and just this sort of like rotten system. Let's just blow it up, right? Let's just toss a grenade in there and blow it up. And now I, of course, think that's quite ignorant on a number of levels. And I think tossing a grenade in and blowing it up is going to lead to enormous suffering. One of the things that strikes me again and again is just how much Americans take for granted the superstructure of the federal government and how much it protects them and how much it is doing for them every single day and how much worse things could get really fast. I just think we haven't seen anything genuinely bad in long enough now that we're like a little bit like spoiled kids. Like we're like, no, we're complaining about stuff and just throwing our toys and we want to blow up the whole thing. But I think we're about to find out that like things can get way worse than this.
Oh, yeah.
You
No,
know, we haven't seen nothing yet.
please join me in helping my documentary film get funded, which is a pro big government, federal government propaganda film to show what they do. Walk into the State Department, walk into FDA,
Yeah.
walk in.
Michael Lewis's book, The Fifth Risk.
Yeah, yeah,
You're familiar with that one?
yeah.
Fantastic book. It's just like, go dig into the federal government bureaucracy and you'll find all sorts of very earnest, socially minded people doing hard, unsexy, out of the spotlight work that, as Michael Lewis says, like makes this one makes you 2% safer, and this one makes you 0.05% safer. And so none of this is stuff you would know. A lot of it just manifests as bad things not happening.
Which
But
is
there's a lot going on, and we absolutely take it for granted. And one of my familiar rants, as you will know if you follow me on Twitter, is that for the last 5, 6 decades now, the right has very deliberately built a propaganda apparatus, the main function of which is not to advance any positive agenda. It's just to say government is bad, Democrats are bad. Repeat. Rinse, repeat. Government bad, Democrats bad, over and over and over and over again. And on the other side, you have like your immigration people, your environment people, your abortion people. Where's just the, hey, government is good, Democrats are good? Where's that? Where's that propaganda? There is no such thing. There is no think tank that is just government in and of itself can be a force for good. There's no, yeah. So I wish you would make that movie. I wish we had institutions. I wish we had educational programs. I wish we reached kids. And just, I think we just take it for granted that people will naturally understand
yeah.
the virtue of freedom of speech and freedom of association and freedom of religion and contract law being enforced, and just like the whole superstructure of law and all of it. Like, we just assume people will see the value of it, and a lot of it is just invisible to people, and they don't see the value of it. And we should have been all this time being much more explicit about just singing the virtues of democracy,
Bad
like liberal
things.
democracy.
Yep, you said singing the virtues of bad things not happening. Join me, Dave, in helping. Let's do a podcast where every day we just report all of the bad things that did not happen, and then
I
put a heavy
know.
focus on the good things that did happen.
Yeah, even when good things happen, they're just like, I'm the millionth person to say this. The media just has this sort of built-in bias toward negativity,
Yeah.
which has gotten worse lately in ways that are complicated and interesting to discuss. But you can't get any daylight on good things. Like I because I professionally pay attention, see that Biden does little good things on climate and energy almost every day, every week. It's not a big deal. It's $2 billion for this, a grant for this, a new office of grid deployment in the Department of Energy. That's not sexy news, but there's a little drip of like positive things happening constantly, and they get no attention, no daylight, no attention. And so no one knows about them. All they ever hear are the bad things that happen.
I want to just ask you one about something you wrote on Twitter. I thought was really fascinating. I guess it was today, and this was about. Yeah, you wrote. Just bear with me. I think everybody will get it. You wrote, in this case, they'll say Dems are rigging everything and persecuting their opponents. If you point to something like Al Franken or Menendez or Hunter Biden, clear examples where Dems allow the rules to penalize their own, they'll just interpret those as clever schemes. What is that you were referring to today?
Yeah, the idea there is just,
Because I want to go on to the next tweet, which is where you say something that's so important that I want to flesh
yeah,
out.
I'm just talking about the psychology of right-wing psychology, reactionary psychology. And if you
Right.
look at it in anywhere in history, you find reactionaries saying basically the same thing. No matter how much power they have and privilege they have, no matter how much they dominate, they always feel like the victims. They always feel like the system is stacked against them, even if you can show them examples of the system not being stacked against them. They'll just interpret that as some scheme or some fake out. So in this case, for instance, right, like they're saying, oh, the Democrats are pursuing lawfare, they're weaponizing the Justice Department, they're using the justice system to go after Republicans and protecting themselves, right? And so then you say, gosh, then why did Biden allow the Justice Department to prosecute his own son for a crime that even the people in Congress who are hounding him about this have admitted like no one else would be prosecuted
Guns
for,
and drugs.
and they're letting it happen? Bob Menendez is corrupt as hell and he's on trial. There's not a bunch of Dems out defending him. There's not a bunch of Dems out saying his trial is rigged. They're letting
No,
it proceed. Like Al Franken groped a woman, and Dems are like, we love Al Franken, but we're against groping women. So we're going to kick Al Franken out. Like, we're more committed to the rules and values than we are to our tribe. And if you point those examples out to Republicans, like literally, I saw Sean Hannity on TV when the Al Franken thing was going down, talking about how this whole thing with Al Franken is an elaborate, coordinated dance meant to distract you from something else, right? Like they just can't interpret it as a genuine expression of values because they don't, right? They don't have that category in their heads. They don't believe that's real. The only way they know how to interpret it is, and so now it's like you say, why is Joe Biden allowing the Department of Justice to prosecute his son? Now you have them out saying that was an elaborate, coordinated scheme meant to give cover to the lawfare going after Trump. You know what I mean? So these are not beliefs that they came to via reason and evidence. And so you're not going to talk them out of these beliefs with reason and evidence. The idea that they're victims and that their enemies are all powerful, those are starting points, not ending points. That's not conclusions they came to. That's feelings they have that they start with, and then they go out and look for evidence. But if you start with that, you're always going to be able to find evidence for it.
So that's exactly what I wanted to get to. The last line you wrote in the secondary tweet was reactionary instincts don't operate on reason and cannot be refuted or diminished by reason. So much of our political class and political punditry is trying to use reason to dispute the claims that are being made, including questions to the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, today. If it's contempt when Merrick Garland doesn't show up, why isn't it contempt when Jim Jordan didn't show up? Oh, that was different. Like, why are you trying to refute Mike Johnson on this? And specifically what happened in my town is that we lost 3 board seats about a month ago at our Board of Education in a really dangerous, fascist, white supremacist fight. It was awful, David. And all I keep thinking about is what you just said there, and you put it into words, because we didn't know how to react and refute to their claims because they just made them up, that our board made policy about trans kids using bathrooms.
And it's so easy to manipulate. It's so easy for them to manipulate liberals because liberals, of course, are like famously these days college educated, and liberals love words. Liberals love words and arguments. Like they want to believe that the world runs on words and arguments. So if you're a righty, you can just toss out fake arguments and Dems are going to chase everyone. They're going to spend hours gathering evidence and refuting everyone. You don't care. You don't care one way or the other. You're just wasting their time. And this is how I feel in the wake of every controversy these days.
Yeah.
Just like in the wake of Trump being indicted, they just threw out a bunch of chaff, a bunch of ridiculous arguments. And of course, like, here come the lefties dutifully, like, assembling a fact check on each one of these claims as though there's any hope, any prospect of changing any of their minds on any of this. Like they know they're just wasting lefties' time and energy, but for some reason people on the left just can't resist. They hear a bad argument and they want to argue against it. They cannot resist.
What are we supposed to do?
I don't know. Like this is the unanswerable problem. Like, for the left to succeed on the broadest scale, on the sort of biggest picture scale, for the left to succeed requires institutions, trusted institutions, and rules that apply to everyone equally. That's like the premise of left governance. And so if half of a system basically stops caring about the rules and starts operating on a purely tribal basis, just seeking power, then how do you maintain a system of rule of law if one half of it defects? I think the answer is you don't. You can't. That's why I'm pessimistic. You asked earlier why I see dark things happening. That's why. everybody's like, how should Democrats deal with this? How should the left deal with this? And it might be that the answer is, if half of your system defects from the rule of law, the other half can't hold it up on its own. There's no way to maintain a system with only half the people committed to it.
Yeah, trying to win a debate in your town at the school board or the town council is also really hard. It's all taking place on Facebook and at
Oh
board
God.
meetings. And it depends who you're fighting against, but boy, do we have a real effective guy, which is specifically in our town. I'm surprised, speaking of all of what you're saying and taking debate on silly arguments and so on, I'm surprised you haven't jumped all over Trump's claim in Vegas about the electrification of boats and the danger that electric boat engines pose to their owners and anybody else who could get electrocuted. Why not take advantage of that moment to promote your work, sir?
Who's
A whole podcast, please.
who's out there
Sharks or boats?
who's out there with a changeable mind on that subject? Who is out there? If you are inclined to believe that, nothing I say is going to get through to you. And if you don't believe that, why should I say it at all? Like, the words and arguments end up seeming futile in this context, right? If you were open to reasoned persuasion, you wouldn't be believing this in the first place. So what am I supposed to do?
I'll answer the question: shark or electrocution?
By the way, electric boats are awesome. Electric speedboats are a category that's coming along quite quickly now, and they look cool as hell, and they're quiet as hell relative to gas boats. And just like electric cars, they have much more torque. So they're much faster off the mark. Again, like, they're just better. Electric is just better. It's better performing. Never mind climate change. It's just better performing.
You got that electric motor in the water. Doesn't Trump make a good point about?
Protecting electric things against water is what we call a solved problem. It's just, we use electricity around water pretty frequently, and we've figured out how to manage that. So he can put his mind to rest about that.
He's got to put his mind. He should put his whole everything to rest. Let's get into some of your latest. Although I really love hearing your views like this. I love seeing them anywhere, but I wish your political analysis was everywhere and as mainstreamed as possible. You also seem to trust and respect a lot of really, I think, great independent sources, as well as platform them as well. But let me get to specifically some of your work. You recently had a really interesting podcast episode about what's going on in China. And I feel like it's the most important issue to talk about, because we can talk about what we do in the US and we can talk about what we do as a planet. But if China doesn't do the right thing, then we're in bad shape. You guys got very in the weeds, as you always do. It's super fascinating and hard to understand. But my main question is, what would China, much less any other country's, real incentive be? Who's pressuring China, and what are their incentives to electrify their country to go?
This is the key place to start, is realizing that China is a whole separate country and has its own internal cross-cutting pressures, right? Like, we just have this sort of image of China as a caricature from afar, but it's a very big country with a lot of people, a lot of different forces, and a lot of stuff going on. So one of the big things is China, unlike the US, does not have access to enormous quantities of very cheap natural gas. So it depends on coal. So it's having to jump from coal straight to renewables, whereas the US is going coal, natural gas, renewables. It was just a very difficult, a more difficult task, honestly. And there's energy security implications. They want to own and secure supply chains, the manufacturing of these technologies that are going to dominate the next century. They want their own domestic energy that they control and manufacture. So a lot of it, from the Chinese point of view, is about national security, basically. And economic and national security have become somewhat blurred, become the same thing in today's world. And I think Chinese people get climate change and are concerned about it. Just like that's in the background, just like it is in the US. It's probably not the primary thing, but it's in the background. So they're concerned about that too. But mainly it's about national security and economic advantage in the 21st century. I like to say to people, because I think it's bracing for people to hear this, that a lot of what's going on in the energy world would be going on regardless of climate change. Might not be as fast, but it would be happening anyway, because a lot of the incentives driving people have nothing to do with climate change. They're about economic security, they're about national security, they're about economic advantage and competitive advantage in the 21st century, all that kind of stuff. It's about lowering air pollution in China. There's another motivation for you. The air pollution in China 5, 10 years ago, even still today, it's just legendarily awful, to the point that it's like a major public health threat that they were having like riots and protests about. So they need to reduce particulate pollution, which is about coal and cars. And so they are rapidly switching coal for renewables, and they are rapidly switching gas cars for electric cars for reasons independent of climate change. So they have their own sort of set of incentives.
You just talked to this guy, Brett Christophers, who wrote a book, The Price is Wrong, which apparently is a big book. I hold on a second. I listened to that interview, and my main takeaway and question is, when it comes to renewables versus fossil, one is a lot more profitable than the other, it would seem, across the board, and nothing seems to change that. So, what is the market force driven, the capitalist driven incentive for any renewables if you're always going to make more money selling fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, oil?
Yeah, you're a brave man for listening to that podcast. I think that's the longest podcast I've ever done. Like,
Exactly.
I dove into that book thinking that it would be it's an anti-capitalist polemic, and instead it was very detailed examination of electricity markets and the specific features of electricity markets. So much more technical than I expected. But basically, his thesis is just that for a variety of reasons, renewables do not provide. They're providing like 5 to 8% returns, whereas fossil fuel investments are doing like 10 to 15% returns. And his main point is, it doesn't matter if renewables are cheaper to generate than fossil fuel power, because generally the investment decision is not, should I invest in a renewable power plant or a fossil fuel power plant? It's, should I invest in a renewable plant or not? And that decision is made on, is it going to be profitable for me? Is it going to be profitable enough for me? So there's a lot of ways. His conclusion in the book is just, this is evidence that we shouldn't rely on markets and market forces to do this. We should bring in the public dollar. Like, in the end, in his final chapter, he basically comes out and
Right.
says and endorses public ownership of renewables. These governments should just buy and operate these things, because governments can tolerate 5 to 8% returns. They don't need the kind of
Right.
big returns that private people do. And there are other ways to take his argument. Like, you could argue we just need to reform markets or tweak markets in various ways to boost renewables profitability. And there are ways to do that. And you could also just say a big carbon tax would help also. Like, there are market things you can do, but I think the main thrust of his book, and what I would like people to take from it, is just, maybe if you find yourself creating a market and then with a desired outcome, like you want renewables to triumph, and renewables aren't triumphing in your market, and so you tweak the market to help them, and you tweak it again and tweak it again, and next thing you have these super elaborate market structures with kludges and add-ons and bolt-ons and rules and sub-rules, all designed to produce this outcome. I think what he wants you to think about is just, maybe markets aren't the way to do this. You
Mm.
know what I mean? Like, maybe drop the assumption you're going in with, that markets are the best way to do this. Like, maybe if it's that difficult to do it with markets and you have the desired outcome in mind, just bring government in and produce the outcome you want and quit. You don't have to work through markets. And at a certain point, when you created a market out of nothing and every feature of the market is a regulation, it's not really a free market you're dealing with anyway. You've just got a Frankenstein creation
Right.
of a market. So why not just skip all the complexity and just do the thing you want with public money and public power? And
Yes.
it's provocative. I
Would
think it's,
be would work in some governments better than others,
yes,
better than all, of
very
course.
very
Um,
much so.
Before I let you go, I got to ask you. So, some guys, we look at porn, we look at sports, we're nerds about music or something. You seem to be about heat pumps. You have a real thing for heat pumps,
I'm
and
just talking with another heat pump company tomorrow as you as, as
I
you
just
say
saw
this.
that you tweeted that. So what do you've written a lot and you've done some great podcast episodes about it, and people should go learn a lot more. But what do you want to say to homeowners in general, or to government, local and federal government? Because it's different, right? The individual purchase, I don't know the economic terminology, versus public investment.
Yeah, I just want everybody to be as psyched about heat pumps as I am because they're very cool. People understand intuitively, like you put a certain amount of energy into your natural gas boiler and you get a certain amount of energy out. And by the laws of physics, the energy you get out is less than the energy you put in, right? Because there's combustion, there's some waste heat, there's little inefficiencies all along the way. So you get, call it 90% efficiency, best case. A heat pump, you can get 300 to 500% efficiency. You get more energy out of it than you put in because it's not generating the heat, it's just gathering it. It's just going out and gathering the heat that already exists in the air and earth outside. So it's just uses this trick of physics to be wildly efficient, like way above anything else available. And it's quieter and and they just work better. And so I think people don't think a lot about their furnaces. They don't think a lot about their HVAC in their house, but just anybody who's still lighting fossil fuels on fire in their home, I just want people to start thinking of that as like bizarre and retrograde. The idea that you're going to light poisonous liquids on fire in your home that produce, among other things, poisonous gases in your home and are constantly threatening to blow up or burn down your home. Just the whole thing is insane. And
Yeah.
instead, you have this 500% efficient quiet box that sits out back of your house and gathers the heat up from the surrounding atmosphere and brings it into your home. It's just so much better and more elegant. I just want people to get excited about it.
Oh, that needs to be animated in an animation to show all the dangers of burning chemicals for you, your kids, your home.
There's this great I always think about it. Years ago, the Nissan Leaf, back when it first
Yeah,
came out,
yeah.
issued this great commercial. I don't know why they didn't continue on this theme, but there's
Mm.
this great commercial where this guy wakes up, he goes down into his kitchen, and he starts his coffee maker up by pulling the cord, and it goes,
Right,
"Rrrr,"
right,
and then he
right.
starts his dishwasher, "Rrrr," and it just makes you think, yeah, like burning fossil fuels to do normal things inside is crazy. Like we take it for granted, but if you don't have to, why would you keep doing that?
Last thing, and I'll let you go, I promise. You had a great episode. You've talked a lot about federal government investments and specifically the IRA, or the IRA, as you call it. And you had a great episode back in mid March. How's IRA doing? Getting ready for IRA 2 is the episode you followed it up with. And it's really interesting because when we're talking about government policy and government investment, there's a theory about how it'll work, and then it's implemented, and then you can go back and measure, usually in all kinds of different data-driven tools, about how it worked. And enough time has passed, and obviously a lot of it was tax credits, but those go into effect pretty quickly right away. So what do you want to say? Everybody should go listen to those episodes to get all the but getting back to our pro-government propaganda.
But one thing that's important to say is it's not the case that tax cuts or tax credits go into effect immediately. It's actually quite complicated to figure out exactly how they work and what the exemptions are, what the rules are. So different sort of tranches of tax credits are being finalized at different times. And there are some whole families of tax credits in IRA that have not yet, like the IRS or Treasury has not yet issued guidance, which is just to say that it's been almost 2 years since IRA was passed, but still a lot of IRA is being rolled out. Like it's still not completely in effect, which is one reason that it'd be nice for Biden to get reelected. If nothing else, I would just like to see how IRA plays out. You know what I mean? I'd like to see what it looks like when it's completely in effect. There's that, and I think when we think about IRA too, there's just a lot of IRA is just money, just carrots. It's just handing out money to people, and there are a lot of non-money barriers to renewable energy in terms of permitting and licensing and all the paperwork and all the environmental review and the NIMBYs blocking
Right.
land and zoning and all these sort of like extra financial, like bureaucratic and political barriers. Those are largely unaddressed and they desperately need attention. So that's where I think attention is going to be if things work out such that they get another run at this.
But in terms of the effect so far,
It's great. EVs are on track. This was the thrust of the report is EVs are on track. Clean electrification is a little bit behind where the model said it would be because of these non-financial barriers I'm talking about. Like those things are very difficult to model and difficult to predict. But in terms of overall, IRA is just absolutely, you cannot exaggerate its importance. You can't exaggerate its importance, not just for the US economy. Already it's prompted billions and billions of dollars of investment in the South and Midwest, precisely those areas that people are constantly saying got hollowed out by globalization. IRA is pouring investment into those areas. So it's having a transformative effect on the US economy, but also I think we really can't underestimate how much it slapped other governments across the face and woke them up and made them realize, like I went to Australia last year
yeah,
and all they talk about is like, how are we going to keep up with this? What are we going to do to match this? Like, how do we not get left behind? Like the US is in it now. The US is in this race now. We got to get in it too. And so it's just galvanizing effect. It's galvanizing action in governments across the world. Like it had a huge international effect. Our news environment is so dysfunctional. I don't think we hear much about that, but that's one of its primary effects is just shock the world into action.
that's great to hear. That's the case. I didn't realize that we were leading so strongly in that way that other countries would.
Yeah, other governments are giving Biden more credit than
Wow.
American citizens
Wow.
are for IRA, which is perverse. But like somehow they're getting the news clearly, but like Americans, like most Americans don't even know about it. They don't even know about IRA. They have no idea what's in it. They have no idea what it's doing because they just don't hear about it.
You got into a suit and sat down with the former governor of Washington, Jay Inslee. Where's that going to live? I just saw that you did it.
Yeah, that pod is going to go up on my feed on Friday.
Great.
So
Cool.
So no video of the suit, but you can
I
hear
saw a
it.
photo. You look sharp. You look like you left the house.
Yeah, I put shoes on and everything.
I like it. Well, I'm looking forward to hear that. I'm sure it's great. I always love talking to you, man. I really appreciate you joining me. You're one of the people I trust the most out there doing great, purposeful, very important, integral work like nobody else. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pete.
Done. Got it. Awesome.